And welcome to ICD, back in person and on Zoom at the same time. Mizell and Zoom, our community coming together in a new and exciting and different way, and people I have not seen in 4 years except on Zoom, and it's really an honor to be here with you today, and thank you so much for coming and supporting the efforts of the board and the organizers and the volunteers and all of us who want a place to practice in person. And just want to, in case I forget, just thank Mizell, who has been so generous with us and offered us this space at a really good rate, and been so kind and said things like, make sure you have a poster so that people can just wander in if they want. So just thank you for Mizell, thank you for coming, and what we'll do is move into a meditation period here pretty quick, which is what we traditionally did. We'll sit for about 30 minutes together, and then we'll move into a Dharma talk, offer some reflections on sangha and spiritual friendship, and then we'll see where we are. Maybe there'll be time for practice. There'll definitely be some time to socialize afterwards and connect and reconnect, and I really want to encourage you to do that because that's part of the beauty of meeting. And we'll also figure out a way for folks on Zoom to check in with each other. And thank you, Zoom folks. We've got 11 folks on Zoom. I'm going to just turn the camera around for a second so folks on Zoom can see folks in the room.
Hi, Zoomers.
We're one sangha wherever we are, and there's a phrase called Maha Sangha that you may know that means great sangha. So when we have a collective sangha, we can call it a Maha Sangha. So welcome Maha Sangha, and I really want to welcome everybody just exactly as you are today, and who you are and how you identify, and welcoming all the different parts of our personalities and our sexualities and our racial and our cultural identities, our gender identities, expressions, ways of expressing ourselves, our physical and financial abilities, and of course our unique life experiences that we can't help but bring with us to practice. And I say can't help, but we need to bring them with us to practice. We don't want to leave anything out of our curiosity and our skillful looking. That's at the core of Buddhist practice. And I also want to say, you don't need to call yourself a Buddhist to be here. And the Buddha taught a way of looking at the world, a way of looking at our lives, and a way of being in the world that lessens suffering, that lessens delusion, and that I like to think of as a radical reorientation to life. So, and just a couple of logistic things. I checked with Hector before. There's right outside the door, there's a women's room, and then across there's a employee's bathroom. We're welcome to use that employee's bathroom. It's just a single stall, but don't have to go down the hall to find another one. And please do what you need to do to be comfortable today. So it's a new space, it's a new way of practicing, or a way of practicing again for us. And so whether you're at home on Zoom or whether you're in this room, I just really encourage you to take care of yourself in whatever ways you might need to. And that includes, like, if during the meditation period you just need to get up and move, that's okay. Just, be as careful and respectful of the stillness around you, but put your comfort high on the list, because we want our practice to be enjoyable. Because if it's not enjoyable, we don't do it, or at least I don't do it. So, and most of us are looking for pleasure and joy in the world, and this is a very particular kind of pleasure and joy, a very wholesome pleasure and joy that leads to freedom. So let's move into our practice period. And just savoring the transition from the meditation period to our talk, and just maybe staying in that silence for a moment or two more. A silence that might be a little deeper than when we normally practice, because we shared it together and we're supported by each other. And that's sort of the theme of today. It's like, how does it feel? What's it like practicing with others, in this new hybrid setup? How does it feel in the body and in the heart and the mind? How does it feel to join your practice, to join your intentions, to join your presence with others? It feels pretty good, I'll say. It's been a long time, and there is something very beautiful about coming together. This is totally optional for all of us, and yet here we are. We chose to do this of our own free will. And nobody made us. So that's an interesting place to look. Why did I choose? Why am I here? So reflecting on how it feels to practice together, I wanted to share a moment in the Buddha's life and a teaching that might surprise you. You may have heard it, but it surprised me when I first encountered it. And it's from a conversation that the Buddha had with Ananda, his devoted companion. And the sutta goes like this. I'll just read a little bit of it. So I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying in the land of the Sakyans, and that's his homeland. He was a Sakyan. Then Venerable Ananda went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, good friends, admirable companions, and associates are half the spiritual life." So I think if you kind of imagine, it's probably like it was a really nice day, in the Deer Park or wherever they were, and like practice was going well and people were getting along really well, and Ananda was like just digging it, like this is really nice. And maybe the Buddha was feeling that too, because he kind of got into it and he said, "Not so, Ananda, not so, Ananda. Good friends, admirable companions, and associates are the whole of the spiritual life." And then he said, "One with good friends, admirable companions, and associates can expect to develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path," which of course is the Buddha's prescription, the path of liberation, the path that leads to freedom. So, good friends are the whole of the spiritual life, the Buddha said. So what if that was true? What if friendship were at the center of your spiritual practice? What would that mean? And I kind of wonder how that teaching might be landing for you. When I first heard that, I found myself taken aback, because I always thought of myself as someone who sort of walks the path alone. And maybe you can relate or maybe not. Depends where you are on that introvert-extrovert scale, I think. But maybe because I grew up as an only child, I tend to think, I'll just have to get it all figured out on my own. And I don't need any help, and I'll do it myself. And so when I started my meditation practice and exploring these teachings, I was very much a give me a cushion, give me a book type, and I'll get it figured out. And I'll sit here until I do. And that's a little bit of dominant culture conditioning too, this idea that we have to go it alone, that we live, we actually live in this world, this culture that kind of glorifies going it alone. And the Buddha said clearly, good friends are not just helpful, but they are essential. And so when I came across this teaching, and it's a famous one that's often shared, I was puzzled and I was a little dismayed, to be honest, because that wasn't really my plan at all. I can't just do it all by myself? And how are good friends the whole of the spiritual life? What does that really mean? And who are these spiritual friends? And where do you find them? Where do you find these unicorns? And so this is here. this is where we find them. This is the unicorn sanctuary. We're the mythic beings, those good friends in the coming together that we call sangha. And I want to spend a little time with these concepts today, sangha and spiritual friendship, because it's a transition day for our sangha. Our community is evolving, it's moving and changing, as all sanghas have since the Buddha's time.
Barrel district.
Okay. And let me just do something. Okay, there. Barrel District. I've been there once. I think it was pretty good. But yeah, the sangha is changing because it's a living thing, because we're living beings. And this word sangha, that we use all the time, comes from the Pali language, the language of the Buddha's teachings, and it just means community. Group together is how the two syllables come out. And traditionally there's the monastic sangha, which is the community of monks and nuns that have committed themselves to the renunciant life and have taken vows. And then there's the lay sangha, which is the larger community of practitioners, people like us, who follow the teachings and who support the monastics when there's a monastic community to be supported, and support each other on this path to awakening. And before we meditated in the welcome, I said you don't have to call yourself a Buddhist to be here. You're welcome whether this idea, this concept of sangha resonates with you or not. Your presence and your practice is enough. So showing up is something that I love. It's just showing up is shorthand for the whole practice to me. Like, we show up for our experience, we show up for our breath, we show up for each other. We just show up. And showing up is like our first act of generosity, because it makes everything else possible. So showing up with good faith, good intentions, and this sangha supports this spiritual friendship. And it doesn't mean that we have to have it all down, just that we come in goodwill with as much openness and sensitivity as we can, and then paying attention to our experience. So I kind of asked that question a little earlier, but it's really an interesting one to reflect on. What keeps me coming back to practice or coming back to sangha? What am I learning? So one of the things I've learned that's been amazing to me is that I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that senses deep inside that there's another way, a way of being and relating that's outside of consumer culture, built on the root poisons the Buddha identified of greed, hatred, and delusion. And I'm not alone in thinking that, sitting in meditation for half an hour is actually kind of enjoyable. And it's not really that weird. And I'm not alone in thinking that hate was never the remedy for hate, that only love is. And I'm not alone in thinking that there's a path that I can follow to greater freedom. And I'm not alone in thinking that intentions and actions are really powerful things that influence our inner and outer world. And that feels good, to not be alone in those places. And that need to be part of is hardwired. We seek connection, community, belonging. And then on the other hand, sometimes, we fear joining. There's an interesting tension there between joining and belonging. One of those feels really good, and the other is like, I don't know if I'm a joiner, but I want to belong. Maybe that's another Dharma talk. But I wanted to read something that the Taoist writer Jason Gregory said. We fall into the error of believing that we somehow don't belong to the world and must therefore spend our lives trying to earn back the right to belong. So Sangha reminds me that I do belong, and that belonging isn't earned, it's inherent. We belong because we are here. And so this community of friends or admirable companions, whether we've spoken or not, reminds me that I belong. And all we're asked to do is show up as we are, just as we are, sensitive and awake to our experience and open to the experience of others. We just show up and witness each other. So I touched on Sangha being a living thing because it's made up of living beings in an ever-changing world. And you might look at it sort of like a raft that has allowed the Buddha's teachings to travel down the river of time through different eras and cultures and war and peace. And it's conditioned and impermanent like anything else. It's fluid and changing, and yet there's also continuity in it, refuge. Like we see here, this Sangha has transitioned, changed, flowed through time. And sometimes I like to think about like all the efforts of the people who came before us. You know, all the people who chose to become monastics and devote their life to sharing the teachings or transcribing the Buddha's words on leaves and then rubbing berry juice into the incisions to share the teachings for generation after generation. And each time they got done with the 10,000 suttas, they'd have to start all over again because the leaves would be disintegrating. Or the people who fed the monks millions of meals, fed the monks and nuns and kept the Sangha alive. Or people like us who have met in rooms like this and just come together and meditated and talked and shared because that's what we wanted to do. All of this care and effort over 2,600 years, and that really strikes me, you know, how the Buddha's teachings reach us 2,600 years after his life, born by Sangha, shared by spiritual friends, empowered only by generosity and goodwill. No one has been making any of us do this. We do this out of love and compassion. And then I think like how no corporation or government or any institution that's based on economics or power has survived or will survive that sort of span. And now here we are, you know, offering community, offering space for spiritual friendship. So this is our moment in the life of the Mahasangha or the flow of the Dharma. So we can't underestimate the power of this, the community of good friends. And I could give you a history of this Sangha, but it would be a whole other talk, but a little bit about it. You know, it got its start back in 2011 when Larry Yang, who's a queer Asian Dharma teacher, Asian American Dharma teacher, moved to the Valley from San Francisco and sought out community like he had known in other places that he'd lived. And he wanted to share what he loved with his new home. And he wanted a spiritual home as well. And I could tell you like how when I moved to the desert from Seattle, it took me all of about a month to be homesick for the Sangha that I had known in Seattle, and how I looked for that here and I couldn't find one. And then I attended that first meeting at Larry's house, really happy to find the possibility that there were people to practice with and learn from and learn with. And if you ever want to know more about the saga of ICD, let me know. And there's some people in the room who know a lot about the saga of ICD as well. But as I thought about it, I thought, well, that's kind of a whole talk in and of itself. But I also thought about all the people present today and on Zoom and not present who have created and sustained this refuge so that it's here for us today. And even in a small local community, there are so many individuals and generous actions and deeds and showing up that we can remember and be grateful for. And I'd actually just like to be silent for a minute and just honor them in that silence by remembering. And maybe there are people that you know from when you came in the past, or people that you've seen on Zoom, or even the people in this room, just appreciating all of our efforts. Because they're the reason that we're here, whether they're here today or not. They are our spiritual friends. They prepared a place for us today, just as we are holding a place for the person who comes next week for the first time, or next month, or a year from now. And as we remember the efforts of those who have come before us, we might realize also that each one of us, in our own way, carries the sangha forward, carries home the community of spiritual friends. And people sometimes ask me, like, well, did you know you wanted to do this? Or like, how did it happen that you got so involved in sangha? And my answer is always that my answer has always been yes. And it has transformed my life and my relation to practice. Whatever I was asked, if I could do it, I said yes. And why did I do that? Because I was inspired by the people in the community. And even if they didn't always get it always right, I could see their beautiful intentions and their sharing of the Dharma and their sharing of these practices selflessly. And sometimes saying yes has meant saying no or not now to other things and people. And sometimes I've wondered about that. Whenever we come together in community, especially when we try to build community, there's bound to be disagreement, different experiences, ideas of what's important and appropriate, questions of privilege, and all the ways that we identify and express ourselves. And it can be really difficult to navigate at times. And I've had to work with that, not glossing over what's difficult or allowing it to turn me around and make me walk out the door, but paying attention, having the difficult conversations, and seeking repair, and holding that intention for repair with equanimity, knowing that it may not always be possible. So we embody what we value and support, and when we keep coming back to those values, they deepen and they become part of us. And as I was thinking about this, I remembered Larry Yang saying many years ago, we take care of the Dharma and the Dharma takes care of us. So if the Sangha is the community of good friends, so then what makes a good friend? How are we good friends? And why did the Buddha say this thing about the whole of the spiritual life was good friends and admirable companions? Because when somebody says something that it's 100% this or it's 100% that, I always am a little skeptical. Like, really? Let me think of some exceptions. I mean, what about meditation? What about ethics? What about this Eightfold Path? What about metta? What about samadhi? What about all of it? But then it also sounds so lovely. Not so, Ananda, not so. The whole of the spiritual life is good friends. And so I thought for a long time that the Buddha was exaggerating for rhetorical reasons, to just emphasize how important friends along the path are. But as I studied and questioned this more, I came to understand what the Buddha is saying here in a new light. So the Buddha taught in dependencies, causes and conditions, things that, because this is, that arises. When that ceases, this ceases. And in a lot of places in the suttas, the Buddha points out that our sila, or our ethical, our integrity, our practice of ethics, is dependent on and actually arises from being with spiritual friends. So in one sutta, the Buddha asks his followers, if wanderers from other religions were to ask, what is the vital condition for the development of the awakening factors? You should answer them. It's when one has good friends and companions. This is the first vital condition for the development of the awakening factors. And then the Buddha says, one with good friends and companions can expect to be ethical. And he also says good friendship nourishes ethical conduct, or sila. And then this is where the whole finally makes sense, because the Buddha emphasizes again and again the foundational importance of ethics, or sila, how we are in the world, how we are in relation to others, how we start with the development and foundation of personal integrity, and then the rest of the spiritual path flows from that place. Ethical integrity, keeping sila, it's the necessary condition for the arising of gladness, or pamoja, which then conditions the arising of the awakening factors of tranquility, samadhi, and equanimity. And so from here, we can see clearly at last from this place of equanimity into what's real. And that's what leads to liberation. We see through the ways that we make up a separate self and knowing what's real and enduring. So what is really interesting there for me is that the Buddha is saying that there's this necessary condition for the development of sila, or ethics. And that's good friends, that's admirable companions, that's us. And so in that way, good friends are the whole of the spiritual life, because they're essential for support and inspiration to develop our integrity, which is the key to the whole path. And there's some beautiful suttas, the Satana Karaniya Sutta, where the Buddha says it's not necessary for an act of will to reach the end of the path. All that's necessary is to keep sila, to develop our personal ethics and integrity, and everything will naturally flow from that place. It's a natural progression. So I want to just introduce, as we're talking about it, the Pali term Kalyanamitta. So Kalyanamitta is the phrase that the Buddha used, and it simply means good friend or admirable companion. So that's what we've been talking about, this person that kind of inspires our integrity. And so what makes a good Kalyanamitta? Because there's a qualifier there. You know, it's not just any friend. There are friends that actually get us into trouble. I can see we all know that. And the Buddha has some great words about that, about the friends that he calls the taker, the talker, the flatterer, and the spender. And I won't read them all, but they're, you know, you can recognize a taker because your possessions end up theirs. Giving little, they expect a lot. They do their duty out of fear, and they associate for their own advantage. And he goes on with them. But the one I really want to focus on right now is the flatterer, because they're full of meaningless pleasantries. When something needs doing in the present, they point to their own misfortune. They support you equally in doing bad and doing good. They praise you to your face and put you down behind your back. So I think that's the part that I wanted to focus on, supporting. They support you equally in doing bad and doing good. And I reflect sometimes how I've done that in my life. It's like, you know, just sort of going along. Well, this person wants to do this thing, and I don't really think it's a good thing, and I'm just going to be quiet about it. So sometimes I've done that, supporting people in doing bad, as the Buddha says it. That sounds so judgmental. We could use unskillful and skillful. But he's pointing out, like, being a spiritual friend is promoting the skillful actions of our companions and our friends and discouraging the ones that are unskillful. And it's often said that we take on the average characteristics of the 5 people that we hang around with the most. So, the advice is to choose your friends and companions carefully. And when you find friends who are admirable, when you find friends who are committed to the practice of sila and integrity, when you find friends who encourage the parts of you that are wholesome and beautiful and skillful, these are the Kalyanamitta. These are the spiritual friends that are the whole of the spiritual life, because they support your integrity, and integrity supports your movement on the path. And there's value in just being around people like this. Even without saying anything, I feel so inspired when I sit in a room of people meditating. No one has to say a thing, and I'm encouraged and uplifted in my own practice because I know their intentions or they wouldn't be there. And it's a beautiful foundation. Spiritual practice is not just an individual journey. It's not just me and a book and a cushion. We encourage each other and support each other just by showing up and acting on our commitment to these shared values of liberation. And really importantly, providing each other a refuge in this world that often seems and is really hostile to these kind of values. And spiritual friends remind us of what we already know or want to remember. And that's also, I feel, so much like what Dharma talks are about. They're just reminders of what we already know. And that's a lot, too, of what the Buddha did. He was reuniting us with deep truths that we know on some level. The Buddha being the ultimate spiritual friend. So even though I've really been lifting up sangha and focusing on it, I want to be clear that we can find spiritual friends anywhere. We can find them in a place like this, in a sangha, and we can find them in the Buddha or other inspiring beings. And we can find them anywhere, everywhere in our lives. They may be at work, at school, at family, communities of all kinds, not only sangha. And we may even be able to spiritually befriend ourselves, relating to ourselves with that balance of compassion and comfort, and also encouragement and challenge. And if we look with eyes of wisdom, if we look carefully with Dharma eyes, even when others act really unskillfully, they can be a friend too. If I don't focus on that person and judge them, but instead focus my attention and my curiosity on the action itself and what caused it and what the effects are of that action, then I get to see Dharma, I get to see karma in action. I get to see cause and effect. And that's going to further commit me to the path of integrity, because I'm going to see the pain that originates that act and that results from that act. So, what if the whole world was your spiritual friend? What if we center that attitude of friendliness? Could that be the whole of our spiritual life? If I approach each being with an attitude of friendliness and curiosity, then I'm going to treat them in accord with my values and ethics. I'm going to use the speech that's true, kind, connecting, and useful. I'm not going to try and take something that hasn't been freely given. I'm not going to exploit. I'm not going to intentionally cause harm. We're beings in relationship with the world, with each other, and with ourselves. And the spiritual path is both at once, internal and external. And I love the saying that you can't walk it alone and no one can walk it for you. That's pretty much the whole Dharma talk right there. So we incline ourselves and we show up again and again. And I also just want to say it doesn't have to be a big deal to do that, in the sense that sometimes we emphasize that last meditation period that we had, or that teacher's talk, or the way that person made us feel, or whether it was easy getting to the Dharma Center or onto Zoom or whatever it might be, rather than just practicing to practice, showing up, sanghaing to sangha, like stringing beads on a cord. This is just something that I do. You know, one bead, two beads, doesn't make much of a difference. But many beads over a long period of time takes on shape and form and beauty and transforms. So it can be helpful, you know, just to not look so much at how this sit was or that teaching was, but how am I over time? What happens when I keep showing up for my practice and sangha over months, a period of months or years? What happens when I keep sanghaing? What happens when I enter into that river of practice that is still flowing? So, what if friendship was at the center of your spiritual practice? And what if just that is enough? So let's just take a moment to return to silence and let the words settle. And just to contemplate for a few minutes, what if friendship were at the center of your spiritual practice? Or maybe it already is. How might your practice look with friendship at the center? And for a moment, maybe reflecting on admirable companions, Kalyana Mita, spiritual friends in your own life, whether in a sangha or not. Just seeing if you can identify one or two. How did they support your growth? And were there ways that you were able to support theirs? Okay, thank you for listening and being present and reflecting. And would love to open the floor and hear your thoughts on spiritual friendship and maybe somebody you remember or question, or how you practice with this, or how you might like to, or anything at all. I'd just love to hear some voices from this room or on Zoom. So, well, what I'd really like to do is extend our conversation, but do it a little more informally. So, so we have some water and some cookies that I've been dying to try that that Sean brought, and so, you know, after we close the meeting, let's just spend some time together. No, they're here. I think they're in a bag. So, but I wanted to pass out this blessing that we could offer together, and I'll put it up on the screen for folks on Zoom. We can just pass those around, because it's beautiful to hear voices together. And while that's going around, to just say thank you for your support of ICD and being here. And there are 2 baskets in the back of the room that support the community and the teacher, and please donate if you are able to. It's really appreciated. And I'll post that also online for folks, the link for that. And I'm going to share screen with this blessing, if I can figure out how to do that. There. Can folks online see that? On Zoom see that? Okay, great. So does everyone have a prayer, a blessing? Okay, so let's offer this together. Going forth into this world, so in need of light, may I bring all the kindness and wisdom I embody to each being and each situation that I meet. May the power of my practice today strengthen my resolve to be an agent of peace and justice in this world. Going forth together into this world so in need of light, may we together bring all the kindness and wisdom we embody to each being and each situation that we meet. May the power of our practice today strengthen our resolve to be agents of peace and justice in this world. We dedicate our practice for the liberation of all beings, the great, the small, the wise, the ignorant, the powerful, and the powerless. May all beings be liberated from sorrow and loss, hatred and injustice, scarcity and want, and every form of suffering. May our practice today be a prayer for peace, and may it benefit all beings without exception. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here and sharing in our transition phase and in this community. And so please, before you head out, we've got some delicious cookies and waters over there, and I'd love for you to stick around for a bit and get a chance to chat and reconnect, ask lingering questions, or just unwind for a moment. So thank you. I'll meet you over by the cookies. You can keep it if you want, but thank you, Zoom folks. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, thank you. And we'll figure out, I'd love to get some feedback on how the Zoom stuff works, but maybe we can email or talk about it at a quieter meeting, but I would love to know how it's working online. So hope to talk to you soon, and thank you for being here, and talk to you again.